Ezekiel is an interesting book on its own, which merits much more than I'm going to say today. But it's a book that was written and compiled in the time when Israel were exiles. They were living in Babylon. And what they had known had been destroyed. The temple was destroyed in 586 before Christ. And this is in that period where they're not in their own soil, they can't worship in their own space, they can't hear the word of the Lord being read out in that space, they cannot gather as Israel did. It is in that same period that they complained and they brought their hearts to God, saying that the Babylonians are asking us to sing our songs of praise as entertainment to them. They're demanding that we become puppets. Like Bonnie M sang a song about that, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. It's a catchy tune, eh? It reminds us and them of a very dark place in their history where they wept because that which they had set aside for God alone had become the entertainment of those who they were under. And in this time, Ezekiel brings the word of the Lord, and over you'll find that he reminds them that God is going to restore this. God will not let this be the case. God will bring them back. And so when we dive into Ezekiel 37, we should really tie to it Ezekiel 11 and Ezekiel 36 as well, where God in both instances says almost exactly the same thing. I will give you a new heart and put my spirit in you. It's Ezekiel 11, and Ezekiel 36, he says, I'll take away the heart of stone and I'll give you a new heart and a new spirit. And then it's repeated in chapter 37 that God says, these bones are Israel. Wow, I better not do that. These bones are Israel. All of them. Speak to them. Can these bones live? Now Ezekiel's answer, I don't know, it depends on how you read it. It depends on how you approach the answer. Because he says, Lord, you know. Does that mean he says, Lord, I don't know, and you do? Does that mean he says, Lord, I affirm that you know this? We don't know. We can't say. We don't have enough information in that phrase. But can these bones live? The Valley of Dry Bones has a collection of human bones that is no longer joined together, that no longer has any function, that no longer serves any particular purpose. We would be fair to say that it reminded Ezekiel and reminded Israel of something that once did exactly that. It was functional. It had purpose. It was alive. It was thriving. There were many of them. But now none of those things were true, hinting to a former life, reminding him that it has died. It has come to an end. And so the question God asks of Ezekiel is not of probability, because if he had to answer that, the answer would be no. Looking at the Valley of Dry Bones, the forecast says it's over. The statistics and the bottom line of looking at what they find there says it's probably not going to happen. But God isn't asking him a question of probability, but of possibility. And therein lies the beauty, the hope. For it doesn't matter which lens he adds to his vision, he will see dry bones, until he sees what God sees, until he speaks the words that God speaks. Now, I've heard in the past people focus on the fact that Ezekiel in this moment is speaking life into these bones. And I want to differ this morning. Yes, there is life in the words he's speaking, but he is not speaking life into the bones. He is doing what God has instructed him to do. God gave him the words to speak. And there are 3 sermons there, really. He speaks to these bones, and they come together. And what God said would happen exactly happens. The bones come together, they form new sinews, they get new flesh and skin, and they rise up. But there is no life in them. And then the second sermon is where he speaks to the winds from the 4 corners of the earth. Not that the earth has any corners. Well, it depends on in which society you belong, hey? But this hints back at Genesis 1, where the Spirit of God was over the earth. And the Hebrew word for the Spirit of God is ruach. It's the same word used for wind. It's the same when God formed Adam in the garden. He blew his spirit into this clay figure, and he began to live. And so the second sermon is exactly that, where Ezekiel is speaking under God's instruction to bring life into these bones. Bodies alone, with sinews and flesh and skin, are not enough for life. They needed the breath of God. They needed the Spirit of God to be breathed into them. And may I remind you of Acts chapter 2, where the disciples are together, and I'm sure that we'll get to that exact chapter in the next couple of months. It would be hard to skip over it after Easter. They were afraid. They were hiding. They saw the valley of dry bones. And then God breathed his Spirit into them. And their fear changed into a boldness. They opened the door, started sharing the gospel in all the languages that were present in Israel, in Jerusalem. And even today, Jerusalem is a cosmopolitan place where people speak a variety of languages. And this was so powerfully done so early in the morning that the rest of the people thought, they must be drunk. There's just no way that this noise can happen at this hour of the morning. Why? Because they received the Spirit of God. They received the Spirit of God. And then the third part of that explains why this is Israel. And there's a sandwich there. Verse 5a, breath and life. Verse 6a, sinews, skin and flesh. And then verse 6b, breath and life again. Ezekiel wants to really highlight that life comes from this breath. And in that third sermon, where God explains why this is Israel and what this actually means to them, there is a repeating message that the graves will open, so that which held them captive, that which sealed their fate and was final, will open. Not just will it open, God will call them forth from that. And that's repeated in those last couple of verses, as you heard this morning. And so it links to what we find in John chapter 11. To Mary and Martha, the probability of them seeing their brother again was 0. That ship had sailed, that day had come and gone, and Jesus wasn't there. To Ezekiel and Israel, finding themselves as exiles, those bones were dry and dead, and there was no hope left in it. And I can link so many things in my own understanding of the world and the church to these dry bones, or to Mary and Martha standing in front of a grave. And I'm sure you can too. So God is not asking, is it likely? Is it in the forecast? Does it look promising? Do you have a plan to restore, renew, revitalize, recreate? God is merely asking, can you see these bones live? Can you see past the evidence? Can you see past the bad news? Can you see past the destruction and the end of it? Ezekiel could, I'd like to believe, or he would have walked away. And so then he trusted God, that by saying, and I mean this with respect, but by saying silly words to a valley full of bones will result in something. But he trusted God more than he trusted his eyesight. To deepen our faith, to deepen our journey towards Easter, we can't go past this question. Can these bones live? Can these bones live? And that's why this morning at our call to worship, if you wondered about this, then you're in the right place. For we wonder about this question not alone, but with God being here, present in us, with us. And hope lives where God is. May the stories inspire us to really ask deep questions, to not just brush over them, but to stand and really see the valley of dry bones, to really see the tomb, the grave where Lazarus had been placed in, and then to see Jesus with us in every step.